Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the enormous privilege of serving as president of Hunter College. Hunter is the place where the American dream continues to come true, in person or online, just as it did for generations of brilliant, highly accomplished, history-making women of consequence, like the extraordinary alumna we are excited to be discussing today, Bella Abzug, class of 1942, one of the unforgettable, groundbreaking leaders of the 20th century women's movement. For her entire life, Bella embodied both the formal and informal mottos of Hunter College. The official one is Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine. And for decades, Bella fought to break down the barriers preventing equal opportunity for women, caring for the future by helping make it possible for every girl to live the dream. Bella lived as a poor kid from the Bronx, and for decades, Bella fought to break down the barriers preventing equal opportunity for women, caring for the future by helping make it possible for every girl to live the dream Bella lived. As a poor kid from the Bronx, whose father owned the Live and Let Live meat market, who dared to say the Kaddish prayers in the men's section of her Orthodox synagogue after her father died, who met lifelong friends and allies at Hunter, and who became president of the student government here. Once, as a senior, Bella even got to sit on stage wearing the first of her soon-to-be trademark hats to welcome Eleanor Roosevelt to Hunter College. Bella first ran for Congress 51 years ago, propelled to victory in 1970 by the memorable slogan, "This woman's place is in the House of Representatives." At the time, there were only 19 women in Congress. Today, that number has increased sixfold to 117. But we have no doubt what Bella would say if she were here to count heads and comment. She'd shout, "Still not enough." That's because Bella also exemplifies the school's unofficial motto. That's, "You can always tell a Hunter girl, but you can't tell her much." And if it's true that maybe Bella was a better talker than she was a listener, it's also true that her booming voice, her courageous ideas, her inexhaustible energy, and her refusal to be silenced contributed to ending the Hollywood blacklist, advancing the ERA, writing the first Freedom of Information law, stopping the Vietnam War, equalizing financial credit for women, safeguarding a woman's right to control her own body, and, of course, opening up political doors for women all over the country. In fact, some of the next generation of women leaders who are joining us in the virtual audience today are always the first to tell us how much they credit Bella with making possible their own opportunities in government and politics. Among them are our own Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, former Borough President Ruth Messinger, and our current Borough President, Gail Brewer. Welcome to all, and to all the Bella veterans who have tuned in for this program, including our wonderful Hunter neighbor, Gloria Steinem. And a special hello to the Abzug family, especially Liz, founder and CEO of the Bella Abzug Leadership Institute, based right here at Hunter College, from whom we will be hearing a bit later in the program. What better time to present this discussion than as the final event in Women's History Month, which Bella herself championed. Well, I admit that we originally did have a better time last March when this program was first scheduled to mark Bella's 100th birthday, as well as the 150th anniversary of Hunter College. As it turned out, it was the very first event we had to cancel because of the COVID lockdown. So we're thrilled that we brought everyone back together to pick up where we left off. And how perfect it is that we present this event from Roosevelt House, which Bella herself visited in the 1980s to help launch a new era in international feminism. As most of our program regulars well know, this living landmark is the one-time home of the First Lady of the world, Eleanor Roosevelt. So this afternoon, we channel both Eleanor and Bella. However different their personal styles, they fought for common causes: world peace, economic progress, civil rights, women's rights, and human rights, often against great odds and stubborn resistance. You will hear much more about all things Bella today because we have an exceptional panel to bring her to life. It's time to meet our participants. First, we are delighted to welcome the author of Battling Bella, The Protest Politics of Bella Abzug, published just 1 year ago, the first academic biography of the late Congresswoman. Leandra Ruth Zarnow is an associate professor of history at the University of Houston, where she also serves as an affiliated faculty member in the departments of Jewish Studies and of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Among her other work, she co-edited Suffrage at 100, Women in American Politics Since 1920. And she has also appeared in the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and on NPR and PBS. We're delighted she is joining us from Texas today and proud that she used the Hunter Archives so productively to research Battling Bella. Leandra, good luck to your Houston Cougars when they play in the Final Four this weekend, and thank you so much for bringing Bella alive and for being with us today. To join the conversation, it's a special pleasure to welcome a New York legend in her own right, activist, political pro, and longtime New York City Council member Ronnie Eldridge. Ronnie also served as an assistant to the mayor in the Lindsay administration and director of the State Division for Women under Governor Mario Cuomo. Ronnie was one of Bella's closest friends and allies, and nearly 50 years ago in 1972, she served as campaign manager in one of the most legendary political races in New York history, the Democratic primary that pitted two incumbent progressives against each other in a redrawn district, Bella and Bill Ryan. I suspect you'll hear more about that campaign today, so suffice it to say that Ronnie got through it in one piece, and so ultimately did Bella. And that led Ronnie's unforgettable late husband, Jimmy Breslin, to acknowledge Bella's historic place in the peace movement. He said, "Some came early, some came late, but Bella's been there forever." A high compliment indeed from Jimmy. In recent years, Ronnie has been host to her own interview series on CUNY TV, Eldridge and Company, which she has continued all through the pandemic. And I promise this is true because you won't believe it when you see and hear her. This amazing woman just celebrated her 90th birthday. Congratulations and welcome, Ronnie, and thank you for all you do for New York City. To moderate today's program, who else but the Jonathan Fenton Director of Roosevelt House, our own Harold Holzer. As many of you already know, Harold is not only an award-winning historian, he also served as Bella Abzug's press secretary in Congress, then in her 1976 race for United States Senator, later in her 1977 campaign for mayor, and finally as spokesman for the 1977 National Women's Convention in Leandra's own home base of Houston. These experiences Harold always called his graduate school. The two of them remained close until Bella's death in 1998, and Harold has been a keeper of the flame ever since. I know this will be a spirited, nostalgic, but also scholarly look at the dramatic and enduring impact of this great Hunter alum. Bella loved her Hunter years, and she always said that they helped launch a true sisterhood of political activism. Certainly, it was an enduring one. The women she met at Hunter in the early 1940s became her friends and political allies for life, in causes ranging from nuclear disarmament to women's rights to global environmental justice. We are so proud to call Bella Abzug an alum. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Leandra and Ronnie, and of course, our own Harold Holzer, to whom I now turn over the program. Harold?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for all you do to keep Bella's memory alive and well here at Hunter. So we have as you mentioned, an amazing number of Bella veterans in our midst this evening. I'm going to race through the names because they were all good enough to join. I may miss some, but here we go. Eve Abzug, Margot Pallavi, Hunter 1958, by the way, June Zeitlin, Brenda Levin, Peter Rosenstein, Peter Rabinowitz, Jerry Skurnick, Billy Kreisberg, Alice Heyman, Cora Weiss, Blanche Wiesen-Cook, Emmanuel Setlow, Harold Islin, Merle Freimark, CUNY trustees Henry Berger and Kenny Sunshine, Trudy Mason, and many, many others. Thank you all. So this is going to be something of a multimedia event, as you may have noticed from the illustrations at the outset. And before we start our conversation, I want to welcome for a brief hello, a very special keeper of the flame.
Hi, my name is Liz Abzug, the founder and director of the Bella Abzug Leadership Institute, and a daughter, one of the daughters of Bella Abzug. Want to welcome you tonight. I want to thank Harold Holzer, the Roosevelt House, and President Rob for having this event tonight. We're thrilled that the author of Battling Bella, Leandra Zarno, is going to be able to discuss the book tonight with us. And I sort of feel like I've known her now for 7 years or so when she first started writing the book as a doctoral student about Bella. I'm sure that she will answer any questions at the end of her presentation. And we're thrilled to be able to have this night to remember and talk about our mom. And on behalf of Eve, my sister, and the rest of our family, we welcome you to this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. So let's launch the conversation. First of all, welcome from me, Ronnie and Leandra. Great to see you. And thank you, Leandra, for Battling Bella, which has brought us together. It may have taken a year, but here we are. And it's great to me to see that there's a new generation of women exploring Bella's career and her impact. That means a lot. So let me start our own introductions to Bella. That's the first topic. Ronnie, how did you meet Bella, and how did you become allies? I love that picture, by the way.
Thank you. Now I'm going to have to explain another personality, Al Lowenstein, who was, like Bella, a very talented guy who wanted to be in Congress. And he ran on the West Side in 1966, I think. And it was it was an election between all the reform clubs, which is very difficult, I think, for anybody to understand today. But anyway, we had a first primary and then the real primary after. Well, he lost. I think he lost by about 13 votes, and it was very close. And then he said to me, there's a thing on the East Side called the 17th Action, the Peace Action Committee, which is, it interviews candidates for Congress from that district. And I'd like to be interviewed. So would you please call this woman? She's Bella Abzug, and this is her number. And I called her and I heard her voice, and I had this immediate vision of a woman like Golda Meir sitting in a garret on the phone, talking. Anyway, she told me they've already supported Jerry Wilson, and that was it. And of course, like Al, his brother owned a restaurant which he used as his own private dining room, and he always invited people. So he invited Bella and Martin to dinner, and me and Larry Eldridge. And we went, and I was so taken aback because Bella was beautiful and fun. And we had a very good time, and we became very close friends.
I didn't know it was at a restaurant. That's great.
So
I'll throw in my 2 cents. I met Bella in 1970. My wife and I met her. This picture was taken about a year later when she opened her first congressional office in 1971. Yes, that's real hair. Went to a place called Ronnie, you may remember this because you didn't live far from it. I think it was called the Pharmaceutical Center or something. It was on 69th Street between Columbus and West End. It was like a clubhouse for pharmacists, but it had an auditorium in the basement. And we went to cover a debate between congressional hopefuls, Bella Abzug, Leonard Farbstein, and Barry Farber.
Oh,
And Farbstein didn't show up. He never did. But Barry Farber showed up. And his first comment was, if he's elected to Congress, he was the Republican and Liberal Party candidate that year. If I'm elected to Congress, I'm going to do my daily radio show from the House floor. And it was the Bella's turn, and she stood up and said, honey, you're going to have to give up that damn radio show. You're going to run. And that was the first word I ever heard her spoken. We went up to her after the speech and we said, we think you're amazing. I mean, we were just fawning. We were reporters, but we were fawning. And we said, we're crazy about you. She basically said, of course you are. And that's how we met. Leandra, I know you didn't meet her 50 years ago, but
No, unfortunately.
tell us how you turned to Bella as the subject of your thesis and ultimately a book.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for having this intergenerational conversation this evening, to President Rob for those rich introductions. And I have to thank Liz, who actually I met over 15 years ago, because I've been at this since about 2004, 2005. And Liz and Eve really, they're the way that I first met Bella, meeting Liz, especially at the beginning of this project, and they've provided contacts and time and memories over the years and given me the space to draw my own conclusions, actually. And also, I've been in conversation with both Harold and Ronnie before, as when I was researching this book. One of the true joys has really been interviewing so many people whose lives were touched by Bella Abzug, because she is not a two-dimensional character. And so historical documents can only tell so much. And so what I got of her magnanimous and vociferous personality, the way in which she was impossible and made sure she was impossible to ignore, the way she electrified a room, really is from these really rich stories. And the stories began in, for me, about Bella Abzug in my own upbringing, in my own house. I'm the daughter of 1960s and 70s radicals. My mother went to Evergreen College in Washington, which was an experimental college, and she was in the inaugural class. Lived in a co-op, worked for an anti-domestic violence shelter. My father was an organizer in the Vietnam Vets Against the War and Students for Democratic Society. And some of my first memories were really at demonstrations in a stroller. And I'm sure that both Liz and Eve can relate to that. And I grew up reading tales from the stories of free children, and hearing a lot of stories from the front lines. And one that really struck me was my dad's experience marching down Fifth Avenue in the 1970 Women's Strike for Equality. He happened to just be visiting relatives who were he's from California, as am I, and they bring him along, and he was memorized by the oratory of Bella Abzug, just this incredible speaker. And then when I arrived at Smith College, I had the opportunity to work at the Sophia Smith collection, and I helped process Gloria Steinem's papers. So thank you, Gloria, for that. And I remember pausing to read correspondence between Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug, and was really taken by these endearing notes. And so when I got to graduate school, I by chance heard about the 1977 National Women's Conference, which was not receiving its due in history, and I'm trying to help change that through some of the work I do at University of Houston. And so I was searching through the stacks, found a book that said, "What Women Want." I thought, well, of course, and pulled it off the stacks. And that was the way that I discovered the National Women's Conference, and specifically that Bella Abzug, was the presiding officer, and this is one of her, final legislative acts to enable this particular conference. So I was really floored, quite honestly, that no one had really given a full treatment of the work that Bella Abzug did, because she is one of the most recognizable faces of women in politics in the 1970s, for sure, and I would argue in all of U.S. history for women. And so it's been a pleasure to to study her over the course of this time. And one area that I think is super important that she offers us is really thinking about how to to achieve transformative change within institutions. She worked in the courts, she worked in Congress, she worked the press, and was really thinking about how to bring in and radical change through institutions. She really believed that law is a social instrument for change, despite her critique of it and despite laws misuses. And I think that we can, really sit with that as a contribution.
So it's almost genetic and scholarly. Ronnie,
That's
you've
great, a
heard,
little bit of both.
you've heard Leandra raises a really important point, and I want to turn to you because you saw Bella in both roles. I really saw her sort of emerging in the insider role
Mhm.
in Congress and as a candidate for office. What was it a different Bella who was the protest Bella, the outsider from the Bella that went to Congress? How did she evolve, or didn't she?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, inside she was the same, I think, and that this is going to take a long time, Harold. You sure you want me to answer? I met her because of Al Lowenstein, but she didn't really understand the political process. She understood that they wanted to pick a candidate and she wanted to have the war be the issue. Anyway, after that, and I don't mean to be immodest about this, but I was a reformer and a former district leader and a leader in that reform movement. And I think that she and I designed a way for the 68 election for the delegates, because we weren't going to support, and we being a very open kind of thing, I don't even really know who they were, support candidates who were not opposed to the war. And we were the first people, I think, to start that question. McCarthy, Kennedy, are you opposed to the war? Before that, I recruited her for John Lindsay's campaign because I went to work for John Lindsay, and I had volunteered as the person to help him get Democratic support because he had lost the Republican primary. And it took a lot of coaching to get her with Women's Strike, and most her volunteers were all from Women's Strike, into the headquarters. It's my favorite story is that she punched me on Fifth Avenue arguing about what was going to happen. So she wasn't a basic political being, meaning inside the political realm, but she sure knew how to get the political attention. And I think that, and then she was wonderful with knowing all the rules and all of that kind of thing. But that opened a whole another world for her, I think. And she then went wholehearted. She after the Lindsay campaign, she decided she was going to run for Congress.
Right.
And that's when that started.
And not
that's
be
when
in the administration.
well, I don't know what she was offered in the administration, but she wanted to be herself.
Yeah.
She's not a good team worker if she's not the head of the team. Is that
No,
a fair thing to say?
Yeah, the manager, the general manager, and the owner.
Right. She's
As
a
long as we're
leader.
doing-
She's a leader.
She was a leader.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you an interesting process story. You're right. She didn't know the process, and I think she didn't care. So in 1970, the Reform Caucus met to designate a candidate for Congress to run against Leonard Farbstein. And when she got to the meeting, she said, well, I'm bringing in Women's Strike. I'm bringing in, women from other groups. And someone said, well, they can't vote. And Bella said, that's what you think. And that's why she won the designation, because she just refused to recognize what the credentialing system was at a reform. She said, this is a Reform Caucus.
Yeah.
They can vote. So,
Yeah.
Leandra, I want to go to you about, I was very struck by something you said early in the book, that Bella, and I don't disagree with it, that Bella had an instinctive contrarian streak. So when you wrote about her early days in Congress, you reminded me that at the very beginning, she really didn't have any allies. They wouldn't even let her into the House Peace Group, right? The most progressive members didn't want her in. And meanwhile, she's, of course, I will say, it's only symbolic, but it's important. She's integrating the House swimming pool, which was men only. And
She wanted to use it.
she wanted to use it. She wanted to use it before her committee meetings. The guy said, well, we swim nude from 8 to 9, and then you could come at 9 when we're done. And she said, that's what you think. I'll be there at 9, at 8, do what you want. And they all wore bathing suits. And that was the end of the male only swimming pool. But Leandra, trace for us how she went from being a contrarian, even in Congress, to suddenly, not suddenly, but working on alliances that obviously started with women like Patsy Mink and Helen Minor and others.
Yeah, so I would say that on the one hand, she wanted to push the envelope and she refused to go along to get along, right? So that's often what the freshmen, or as she put it, fresh women would hear. But at the same time, because of her background as a lawyer, I think she was willing to try to work with the system. And so one of the great finds working in her papers at Columbia was actually a letter that Mim Kelber, her sidekick, speechwriter, advisor, friend from Walton High and Hunter College, wrote to one of the lawyers that Bella Abzug knew in the National Lawyers Guild. And in it, she talks about how Bella Abzug needed to figure out how to be a maverick without becoming a pariah.
Mhm.
And I think that was the fine line, actually, that Bella always was walking,
Right.
you know, in Congress. And she was extremely frustrated, you know, about 6 months in, that, as in her words, Congress was a slow moving behemoth.
Yeah.
So, you know, it wouldn't move quick enough for her. So she tried to learn how to, you know, kind of move around the system. And she realized after, you know, the first few months or so, that just pushing and pushing and pushing as she wanted to do wasn't going to be good enough, that she in fact had to build alliances across the aisle to get things done. She figured out enough about how to also work the system, to figure out the procedure, the rules of Congress, in order to be able to manipulate them to her cause. In fact, she said, well, the Southern Democrats are so good at it, why can't, you know, the progressives like me as well be able to do that? So I think her ability to learn how to navigate and ultimately figure out when to build consensus and build alliances and when not to, really, I think was one of her, you know, her greatest skills, and pulling from her legal experience. But she understood that Congress was not made for her or women in general. And she figured out ways to work around that. So for instance, you know, the House Whip gave out little cards that fit in a man's wallet, perfectly fit for, you know, had all kinds of rules of things you could and couldn't do on the floor. And she had her staff create a purse-sized version of all of the rules that she might be able to, you know, maneuver with to kind of shift the debate in the way that she wanted to. And so that to me was a strategy that demonstrated her savviness, but also her frustration with the fact that Congress was in fact not made for women. And, you know, it's just a small little thing, but down to the architecture of not having a bathroom to go to near the House floor, it really was clear that she was not welcome there. As were other congresswomen.
Harold, I'd like to talk about the other side of her, the inside of her, all right, for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. During that campaign in 1970, my husband, Larry Eldridge, died very suddenly overnight. He's 42 years old. And Bella, it's in the middle of her campaign, and Bella was at the house every day. I don't know how she managed to get there. I mean, she went through the papers, she looked at this, she looked at that. She was there so much that my mother was jealous because she thought that Bella was usurping her property. And then they invited us and me and my 3 children to go with them a Christmas vacation down to Puerto Rico. And then when she was in Congress, we lived on 93rd Street between Amsterdam and Columbus. So she would come in at LaGuardia and she'd be going down to the Village. She stopped at the house a couple of times a week at night, just to talk and catch up, and then just to be there, sometimes for advice. I mean, I'll never forget when her mother, remember when she was in charge, she was opposed because she put her mother on Medicaid. Did you write about that, Leander? I don't quite remember it, but and she came to the house and it was summertime and it was a brownstone. The French doors were open and she was so angry. And all of a sudden the doorbell rang and it was Arthur Schiff, who was a specialist at the Human Resources Agency. And he said, I heard the conversation and I thought I might be able to be helpful.
But he knew he'd find her there.
What?
He
Sorry.
knew he would find her at your
Yeah.
house.
Oh, he heard her there. That's why he came through the open window.
Oh, I see.
Everybody in the neighborhood heard about it. But
I
she
remember
had
that.
this, she always had this softer inner part that
Mhm.
saved her friendships, I think, also. I mean, and she made a lot of friends in Congress, didn't she? She
Yeah,
was-
well, she
yeah.
ultimately did. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
you know, joined a trip to China
yeah.
in about 74 and took a film of it, which I've only seen once. She had a showing of it in Washington, and it was unintentionally hysterical because Bella was not made to be the moderator in a program, but she was talking to, remember Curtis Collins and Curtis Collins' son and all, and it was
Yeah.
just a riot. But, you know, then Martin took a picture of her from the back walking up the Great Wall of China.
Oh,
He
God.
almost killed him in the theater for taking that shot. It was, but still pretty amazing.
Yeah.
You know, the other side of her, the warm side, yes, the determined side, but the insider side, I don't take that for granted at all, because even though she was making statements in the House by introducing impeachment on the first day she was there, right? End the war. The first day she was on the floor, everybody yelled, sit down. Well, not everybody, but people said, wanted to muzzle her, wanted to bar her from speaking in the future, do anything to, but in the meantime, and they also assigned her to what they thought were bad committee assignments,
Right.
public works,
I remember.
and government operations. Well, she simply went to Public Works and said, well, part of this has to be for New York. She impressed the Texan who ran the committee. They became friends. Government Ops gave her a subcommittee on government secrecy and individual rights. She
Mhm.
did great work on that. And in Public Works, remember, it was she who created a bill to transfer the federal funding that was supposed to go to the Westway Interstate and
Mhm.
transferred it to mass transit capital improvements, which
Right.
not enough, but we needed it desperately. And in government ops, one quick story. She, no one had ever gotten money for New York City for providing the protection for the United Nations General Assembly, which was an enormous security expense. Bella got it through. I don't know if people realize that who are watching. And the way she got it through was to create a Government Protective Services Act so that other cities that had, you know, attaches or diplomatic missions could also apply for security money. So it rallied members of Congress from around the country. New York got the lion's share, but they could tell their constituents they didn't give away money to New York. We got some too. So I think, you know, she was a terrific legislator.
I agree. She was very effective, very, and creative, very creative.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, specifically, I mean, it was a hard fight to lose to not be put on the Armed Services Committee, what she really wanted. But the fact that, you know, when in some of the correspondence that I saw around these committee appointments, she put a star next to the Government Operations Committee. She knew what the power of that position was, you know, and particularly really, I think, lobbied for the chair position of the Government Information and Individual Rights Subcommittee. And what she did with that committee, I think, has been really underplayed by historians. And, you know, she comes into this position after Watergate in this moment where there's incredible oversight and, you know, reevaluation of not just executive power, but the national security state. And her committee didn't have the jurisdiction or investigative capacity of the Church or Pike committees, but it did have oversight of record keeping of all government agencies. And the paper trail that she left behind is just incredible. It's impressive. She kept the coal to the fire, you know, persistent in the investigation of all the agencies, particularly CIA and FBI. And what I think is so remarkable also is that she really helped Americans figure out exactly why it was important to have the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act, and actually co-sponsored. And so she drew attention to their right to know what the government was doing. And these are tools of democracy that, historians really value, that investigative reporters value, and average Americans as well. And so she went on the talk show circuit at the same time her legal staff, were helping just on the daily grind of how to file FOIA requests. And she's trying to teach, Americans that these are really, really important. She also was worried about big tech in her day, and this like first early days of computers. And, I think we're coming back to some of these, really important conversations about privacy rights at this point. So I think that's a huge legacy for her as a civil libertarian working in Washington.
And a lot of that was personal experience. We used to laugh at, but there was this young, good-looking man with white hair, slight guy, who appeared at all the rallies. You knew he was there recording it. And she knew this. I mean, it was much better for her not to be on the foreign affairs, I think. She would,
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ronnie, you told me a story that maybe you might bring to light here of when she would come late at night during the 1920 campaign, and she turned the water on in the bathroom.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. She used to come in when we were talking about issues and things. We would go into the downstairs, guest bathroom, and she insisted on running the water because she didn't want anybody to listen to us.
Listen, she might have been right about the bugging.
Oh, definitely. And Lowenstein was the opposite. He would say, I don't care if you're listening, but just be quiet and let me talk. So the two of them had this different thing. Should I tell the story about the marijuana when she yelled at me? I had a 40th birthday party and somebody brought me 3 joints, and I didn't usually smoke them. I don't think I'd ever smoked at that time. And she called one night because after I got the kids asleep, this is after Larry died, I would have a little scotch and water. So she says, you sound very mellow tonight. Do you have your drink? And I said, no, as a matter of fact, I'm smoking a joint. She said, how dare you say that to me on the telephone, and slammed it down.
Ella could be very prudish about some things.
Oh, she
Right.
was. Oh, she was really a prude.
So I want to talk about another aspect of her politics. And I hope Jim Capolino is on tonight on the Zoom, because you quote him, Leandra, in the book. He worked for Bella in Washington in his salad days, let's say. And he talked about Bella, the celebrity. He talked about the hundreds of visitors who would come file into the Washington office in Longworth to have a look if they could. So I was very involved not only with nurturing that image of Bella, and I'll tell you why. It was not accidental; it was tactical. So she knew I was interested in Abraham Lincoln, and I told her that in 1860. Abraham Lincoln supporters and Lincoln did not discuss slavery if they could avoid it in that campaign. They talked about his rise from a log cabin, his splitting rails, his work as a flatboatman, anything to nurture the idea that it was a self-made American, not focus on issues. And I don't know if that was dispositive, because she had always been very friendly with theater people and film people and musicians from the days she defended them in the House Un-Americans Activities, crackdowns. But when we went off on campaign trips in the 70s, we would always take a celebrity with us, even at the point where she became more famous than the celebrities. She would say, I want to introduce Candice Bergen. And they would say, oh, we already, we know you. And Candice Bergen would introduce her. Wasn't necessary. What about Bella the celebrity? How important do you see it? And then we'll go to Ronnie, but I want to hear how Leandra sees it in terms of framing her emergence as a national figure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Bella Abzug was one of the best in terms of really bridging or blurring the space between, Hollywood and Broadway and Washington politics. And so this is before West Wing. And, I went to the DNC, a DNC party actually at one point. I worked for Al Gore as an intern and was struck by a party that actually had all the actors from the West Wing and then the folks that were trying to get into the West Wing at the same event. That was unheard of, really, when Bella Abzug was cultivating relationships that were friendships with, people like Barbara Streisand, and having support from Harry Belafonte and others. And so she really, I think, understood that politics is a performance in some ways, as much as it's very important to get, the spotlight on you to be able to amplify the emphasis of substantive policy goals. And I think she really understood that and played that well in a way that now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is running workshops on Capitol Hill to teach, other members how to use social media. I think Bella Abzug would have been viral all the time on Twitter if we had that in her day. And so she was extremely savvy in using all of these different types of messaging spaces. And I think at the same time, it was a way to sometimes discount her as a sideshow, when in fact, that is absolutely not what she wanted to be, in Washington. And so that would be my 2 cents. I'm curious about, Harold, how you strategized to make sure that she was front and center.
We basically didn't say no. I mean, Mike
Mhm.
Douglas asked her to come. You may be too young to remember the Mike Douglas show, but it was a big deal as a national syndicated show.
He's not the actor, he was somebody else.
Oh, that it wasn't Michael Douglas. He was
That's
a
right.
Philadelphia talk show host. Very bland. Actually, I think a lot of Nixon's team came out of the Mike Douglas show, which is odd. But she went on and played the mandolin, which she could do. She was actually very musical in her day. She was a violinist, and then she played the mandolin. She could play the guitar. And that's where Martin uttered one of his most famous lines. Some I can't repeat, but Mike Douglas asked what the secret to their marriage was, and he said, "Great sex."
That's right.
That was on national TV. But Ronnie, don't you think also it was, I mean, she did come out of that world because she was so active in the Red Scare period. I mean, think of who her clients were: Jack Guilford, Zero Mostel,
Right.
Brandt, John Randolph, Lionel Stander, all of these old lefties who were thrown out of Hollywood. And basically Zero Mostel told me once he couldn't even get a job on Broadway for a while. So he, was an artist
Yeah, right.
and stockbroker,
She loved them. She loved it.
and they loved her.
And they loved her. She liked to be loved. So that was great. She loved to be with people who were, more prominent. I mean, she loved that. She loved that they loved her. It was she was very proud of it, I think. And of course they helped raise money, which was a big thing for her. But she was very happy. I never heard any doubts about her relationship with any of them.
Well, I think there were opponents who tried to make it a negative, that called her, insubstantive. She's out with Shirley MacLaine, Elizabeth Taylor. She's not serious, but
I don't remember any of that in New York, and really not in that campaign that
upstate a little bit.
So maybe upstate, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think Harold brought back to a really good.
Maybe that came when she ran for the Senate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Later, yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate what Harold said, which is that, she came from a very, culturally rich world, and that this was the milieu before she ever moved into politics. And, Martin's world as well. He had a running poker game with people like Ring Lardner as, playing with him, and, was very, prolific as a novelist, I shouldn't say prolific, I should say, committed to having his contribution be cultural as much as hers was political. So I think that's part of it.
absolutely. And she had a flamboyant sense, you know, the hats.
Yeah.
She was more comfortable with them, I think, than with other people. You know,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. They were definitely, it was definitely not an occasional or shallow relationship. She was really close with these people. I mean, with Shirley MacLaine particularly, and Streisand, who had, by the way, one of my challenges every year was to write appropriate birthday greetings to Shirley MacLaine and Barbara Streisand because they have the same birthday. And heaven forbid they should show each other the card that they got from Bella. It couldn't be this, there could be no similarity, totally original thoughts. That was actually hard to do.
Harold, the other way too is they loved to be with Bella.
Yeah.
They loved her notoriety, you know, her
And she
fame.
was not easy with him if they didn't know something about politics. You know, she was very tough on Barbara Streisand in 1970 when Streisand was campaigning with her on the.
She said Streisand wanted to have a mast when she was on the back of a flatbed truck.
She has a voice to protect there. Listen, we've been talking a lot about the style, and if Danny is ready in the studio, as they say, I want to show a brief film clip of Bella giving a speech. So just those of us who on the line who didn't see her in action can get a chance to see.
I think all of us, even those of us who may now be in various professions, or many of us, I know I do, have working class backgrounds, and sometimes I think we feel most comfortable when we get together with people from neighborhoods who have those backgrounds. Because the fundamental struggle of working women, neighborhood women, women who are involved in the business of participating in society in every way, in the home as well as in the factory, in the fields, in professions, in offices, women essentially on whom this country has been based and built. Many of us have created the generations which have peopled this nation. And what I think most people don't understand, and what your statement is being made in a very eloquent way to the public to understand, is that a woman's movement is a movement of all women. And fundamental to the movement of women is the participation of all of us as we come out of our neighborhoods, as we come out of our backgrounds, to come together, to exchange our ideas and to discuss our problems. The women whom the Congress of Neighborhood Women represent know that the women's movement is something real. It's not some intellectual upper middle class thing that people try to make it. It's our problems, it's ours, it's us, it's our today. And more than today, it's our tomorrow. We come together for today because we have to build a tomorrow for ourselves, for our neighborhoods, and for our kids, and their neighborhoods, and their hopes, and their future, in the neighborhood, in the city, in the state, and in the country. I believe that the women's movement is real because this is real.
Well, if you see her put the glasses on, that was when she was going back to the text. But she really didn't need the text. She never needed the text, really.
That was always remarkable. She'd come holding a package of papers, right?
Yeah.
And then it would be back and forth, but she really didn't need it at all.
I was once with her in Buffalo. She had two speeches, and she couldn't decide which speech to give. Up until the time the elevator took her up to this penthouse event. The elevator opened and there was a rush of air from below, and all of the speech, everything fell to the ground. I picked it up and she just shuffled them together like a deck of cards and gave her own speech plus the two speeches she had. It was a long night. But part of it was performance, but connection also. And she would do her gestures until she got the applause. Then she would go back to the speech.
Yeah, but Harold, I don't know if you sat behind her or in the wings or something. I guess I must have, because I remember from the back. But when she was ready to really deliver a line, you saw her change and get her balance change. You know, she was ready for battle.
It was a little, and sometimes she would look at me to say, here it comes. By the way, after that Buffalo experience, she said, that was really not good. You should stand in front of me. And when I'm speaking too long, go like this. Cut, right? The classic TV thing. So, okay, the next thing she did, she was on something and I went like this. And afterwards she said, how dare you say cut to me? So that was the only time I did that. So, Leandra, did you speak to people who actually campaigned in politics with her?
You mean on her staff or against her?
Sure. Well, both. Actually, that would be interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I did interview much of her staff, especially the first, run, setting up the office in Congress. And I think, that's really important to really get a sense of the day to day, and to think about how do you first start putting together a congressional staff that has never been like any other. So, for instance, she had, two legislative assistants share a job initially because one wanted to have more time for childcare, and this was a big issue in Bella Abzug's first campaign. Remember, she had on the second floor, I believe it was, a drop-in childcare center, and then goes on to support with Shirley Chisholm the comprehensive childcare bill. So she often would listen to staffers and think about what they were asking for in their job and adjust based on if it worked with her principles. So the second half of that equation was a staffer who basically pushed Bella to have someone focus on women's rights issues. And so she was the first on Capitol Hill that had a staff person specifically devoted to that particular area. But what I'd love to do, Harold, is just get us back to that video that we just saw, because I think it's so powerful because it shows that economic justice was at the core of Bella Abzug's work and philosophy. And sometimes we miss that actually about her because we think about feminism and women's rights as so disconnected. I think what we see from Bella Abzug is that is not the case, that there was this, what we now talk about as an intersectional, focus on, gender issues alongside economic issues. And Bella Abzug really wanted to keep class, front and center, and, really tried to reach out to working class people, both women and those white male blue collar workers who actually, were challenging and taking fist to fist during her campaign down in Wall Street. And so, she goes out during her campaign and tries to talk with them about why they're upset and how maybe they have more common ground with the anti-war movement than the construction workers actually thought. So that kind of work that she did was so essential to her whole outlook. And I think really came out of her long-standing commitment to labor issues. And so I just wanted to put that out there because we often miss that aspect of the work that she did.
You're absolutely right. Barney, did you want to add?
Well, I'm just telling you all these personal things about her. When I would go to Washington, she would go upstairs and sit on the balcony and she would point out to me eligible members of Congress. I always thought they're thinking in their head, she's pointing out everybody about, the war criminals or something.
Right. That's a great story, Ronnie, because I've actually interviewed a lot of staff members who were single at the time and she was trying to
She's always matchmaking.
Yeah,
right.
she was a big matchmaker.
But, I think she had a very successful congressional career. I really do. And I think the reapportionment was terrible. It was a disgusting display. It's like the Georgia legislature with voting.
Yeah. Let's tell people what that is and set it up. So,
Yeah.
because we're in a moment now where there's going to be a reapportionment and probably
That's right.
it's going to be gerrymandered and unfair again and perpetuate
Right.
the fact that the majority doesn't rule in Congress.
Mhm.
So in 1970, there was a census, and in 1971 and 2, the boys got together and they made sure that Bella would lose her seat and she would have to run either in a totally untenable district that included areas, white areas of Brooklyn and Staten Island, or she would be thrown into the district of a veteran reform congressman named William Fitz Ryan. And she believed and I agreed with her at the time, I know you did, Ronnie, that she had an equal right to run in that district. And you were the campaign manager, right? That's where I
Right.
met you,
Right.
sitting behind the desk being yelled at by
Right.
Bella.
I quit my job at City Hall because I was angry. I campaigned for Lindsay in the presidential election, around the country. But when I came back, personnel had changed in City Hall itself, and I became deputy city administrator, which basically was an office in the Liberal Party. But I don't want to explain the whole thing. But they didn't name me first, but I replaced the first. But it was fine with me. I didn't really care. But then in 1972, because it was a patronage spot for liberals, all of a sudden they had a man who I knew and had no respect for, a fellow district leader at one point. He was going to come in, he's Latino. He was going to come in and be the first deputy. And my friend, the deputy mayor, had left, and I had one that I didn't like. So I just quit. And it was fortuitous because it was then I was available to run that campaign. And that campaign was a very personal campaign. I mean, William Fitz Ryan was the earliest reformer elected to Congress in New York, basically, with the West Side reformers. And people loved him. He was a purist. He was the one with no patronage and all kinds of things. I never knew really how effective. I never thought he was really he couldn't be compared to Bella, I don't think, in her breadth of interests, like you say, Leandra. But he had such a loyal following, and then Bella had a loyal following, so it became really a war between these two sides rather than an election. But she won that election, which was really very good.
Well, she won ultimately, but she lost to Ryan by a lot.
Yes,
And he
I'm saying
died.
after I neglected, I jumped a spot.
Yeah.
Ryan won. Bella we all knew he was very sick. He had cancer, we knew that. And it was a very delicate thing. You couldn't say he's gonna die next week, and that was very hard. So people were angry that Bella was running against him. And then before the election in November, he died.
Right.
And his wife decided, Priscilla, to run in his spot.
Did you go to the county committee at what is
No,
now the?
I would
went.
have liked to have been.
We
You
went. Yeah,
Oh,
we
yeah.
went. And it was pretty ugly. I remember when legislators that I respected and liked told me that they were supporting Priscilla Ryan. But she won the procedure. She was very good at those procedures, right?
Mhm.
She always did well, knew how to, her people, and whether it was the New Democratic Coalition or the county committee, she did very well. So she won, but then Mrs. Ryan ran against her in the general election on the Liberal line. So it was a closer race than it should have been. So I'm going to ask one quick question to two of you, personal perspective and a historian's perspective. And then I know Mac is going to want to come in. I see we have a lot of questions from our audience, and I want to give them some time. The classic thing that people say to me when they know my history with Bella is, oh, she should never have left the house. She would have been a power. She would have remained the great influence, but risking it to run for the Senate was a big mistake. And look what happened. She had no office after that. What do you answer? Ronnie, I'll start with you and then we'll end with Leandra.
I don't really answer it. I think essentially she should not have run. And I
Really?
had told her that. But she couldn't let that Senate seat go. She couldn't see somebody else come and run for it, I think. And then what I found the saddest thing is that she ran how many times in other districts?
Well, she
After
ran
that.
in 78 on the east side. She ran in 86 when
Westchester, when
Ted Weiss died. She
Yeah.
ran in Westchester. She won the primary, but lost
yeah,
general.
That's
right. And I kept saying to her, Bella, you can't choose a profession that needs thousands of people to agree to hire you. I mean, it's just it was irrational on her part. And then she went into a whole different world where she was very successful, I think, right, Leandra?
Right.
And she was very happy with that. Are you
Let
going
me
to talk
put,
about?
let me, I'm going to put my 2 cents in and then ask the
Okay.
historian. I mean, I think she should have done it.
Mhm.
I also think she should have won, and she came damn close
Harold, let me
to
just
winning.
interrupt. What was the commercial that was so damaging that they played? You remember that at the end about Moynihan?
Well, they said a print dress does not a lady make,
Mhm.
because she had said that she wouldn't necessarily support Pat Moynihan if he won the primary.
No,
Because
that's
she
not.
certainly felt that she'd been ganged up on by the guys. Ramsey Clark had no chance of winning, and he stayed. Paul O'Dwyer had no chance of winning, siphoning off just enough. The New York Times endorsed her and then pulled the endorsement,
Oh, that was terrible.
replaced it. I mean, only Bella. So, Leandra, I'm going to give you the last word. You're going to be the non-friend and acolyte who has studied it as an historian.
Well,
Did
I
she
do,
need
I
to
do
do
think,
it?
well, I do think the split vote did her in, definitely, between, Ramsey and O'Dwyer. I can't see her not running in 1976. And, to be 1 in 100, as she put it, was a very important goal. And she wasn't the only one that ran for Senate. Her good friend Patsy Mink also ran for Senate and lost in this particular moment. From a historian's perspective, I see this race as extremely important, pivotal for us to look at as kind of a race for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, to not put it mildly. We had polar opposites, ultimately that came down to the wire, with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, overtly running for liberty and for a much more hawkish foreign policy, and Bella Abzug running for equality. So trying to, build on the rights momentum that was already presenting it. But it came down to essentially economics, and also the Vietnam War syndrome. So trying to, kind of shift the course there. And I also think one of the most frustrating aspects for Bella Abzug, and most personal, was being, outdone on the Israel question. There was points where, people would speak to her in either Yiddish or Hebrew because they questioned, if she in fact really was Jewish or Jewish enough. And so she's, outdone because of Moynihan's position and his performance before the United Nations, on the question of Zionism, is Zionism racism, that she couldn't, kind of overcome that element. And I think that also really did a lot of damage, both personally and politically, in this race.
And by the way,
razor thin.
Bella was a lifelong Zionist, and actually at Hunter, and even as a teenager, collecting money, as she used to say, on the subways of New York by shaking a can. She said, "I shook my can on the subways." We all let that go.
Yeah, and Harold, if I may,
she could speak Hebrew and Yiddish. Just saying.
Absolutely. And Harold, if I may, just before we go to Q&A, I pulled up a Hunter bulletin from 1940. And since this is Hunter, I'd love to just mention it really quickly, because I think it's a great tie-in. So this is a 1940 profile. It was titled Bella Savitsky, all-around girl, plays harmonica, bugle 5 ways. And it said that she cut a distinct figure as a dynamic type who makes full use of 5 feet 6 inches, and had an athletic body, nice hands, and hypnotic eyes. And then when they asked her about hobbies, what does she respond? "Oh, I have a sort of peculiar one, Hebrew." So it really ties into what we're talking about there.
She went to Hebrew high school, by the way, just
But
as when she wasn't,
but
in
she
addition
loved the character of people living in Israel. I remember she came to she had called about something to the Israeli consulate, and she said, "This is Bella Abzug." He said, "It's not Abzug, it's Abchuk." He corrected the way she said her name, and she never got over that.
I know, right. Well, by the way, that was an alternative pronunciation. So, but it's Martin's name anyway, just saying. So Mac, why don't you join the party here and bring us our viewer questions?
Hello, Harold. Hello, Ronnie. Hello, Leandra. This has been great. And there are many good questions in the queue, as well as some great comments. Ruth Messenger writing in that she loves the program, loving the book. Hi to Harold and Ronnie. Katrina Vanden Heuvel says, "Thank God there was no Twitter. Twitter in Bella's days. And just to say, Ronnie Eldridge is extraordinary. So that's from Katrina. And then a question from Roosevelt House historian Deborah Gardner. Bella overlapped in Congress with another pioneering woman, Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman from New York to be in Congress. On what issues did they collaborate, and on what issues did they differ?
Leandra, that's for you, I think.
All right. Well, definitely their greatest collaboration, and I think also what maybe became fraught was around the Comprehensive Child Care Act. They really worked, both offices really worked extensively to try to pass this, what would have been a fundamental game changer for women. And it was vetoed ultimately by President Richard Nixon, who called childcare socialistic. And so this was towards the ends of the negotiations, I think became very difficult for both Bella and Shirley to work through. And it kind of came on the, right before the moment where Shirley Chisholm decided to run for president in 1972, and Bella Abzug was a bit hesitant to, overtly endorse her. Concerns, that perhaps that would, undercut the National Women's Political Caucus as it was developing, in its first, kind of negotiations with Democratic leaders. And really wanted to get the support of George McGovern, who was moving to the front and center of, the race, and make sure that, she could help build a feminist political bloc, which actually persists, continues to be there today. And so the fact that really, I think, caused a lot of friction and really personally hurt Shirley Chisholm. And they always had a little bit of, a tiff kind of, intense type of relationship, because they both wanted to be, front and center. And I think we're perhaps in some ways too similar, So I think a lot of the work that they did was very much in tandem, trying to pass this full scale, program of legal feminist landmark legislation that we have today. But the childcare issue was one of the places that they spent the most time connected. But Bella really, she came in one term after Shirley Chisholm, so she really learned a lot from Shirley Chisholm and emulated her in many ways, both acknowledged and unacknowledged, including trying to put together a women-led staff. I think that is really, really important, and also trying to have a public campaign for committee appointments, which Shirley Chisholm definitely pioneered.
Yeah, but I mean, to be really honest, I think we have to say that they were really not close friends. I mean,
No.
they didn't work together. I mean, as you said, Shirley was there before Bella. I'm sure she didn't love Bella coming in because she was her own person. And Bella wanted to, they just didn't work that well together.
Well, they were two powerhouse people. They worked together when they needed to be united.
Yeah,
front.
when they had.
But I think they were, you're right, they were, I mentioned that we saw Shirley in her house one day and they were talking about strategy. And so they had a relationship, but not like she had with other congresswomen. It was sort of interesting. And I think 1972 separated them a bit. Maybe not quite as dramatically as in the Mrs. America series, where I think it was.
Oh, I think that was so inaccurate on every point. It may be not Phyllis Schlafly, but otherwise.
Yeah. And Bella did, for those who want to know, Bella did not smoke ever when I knew her.
Right.
I don't know what all the smoking was about. Okay, Mac.
Yeah, well, since it came up there are a couple of questions, including one from Katrina about the show, Miss America. Katrina says that the show portrays Bella as the inside pragmatic in the McGovern campaign at the convention, with Chisholm as the radical. This is what a younger generation is taking away. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was inaccurate and a little bit offensive, actually, because Bella was both. That's what made her remarkable. She was never, they made her into the series made her into kind of a nag, a conservative nag who was always cautioning Gloria Steinem, cautioning Shirley Chisholm not to get too far in front in issues. And Bella was a radical at heart. She was a leader. And I mean, look, I wasn't at every meeting that by any means that Gloria had with Bella, but I never saw them fighting.
And-
I never saw anything but amazing affection
Right.
and respect between them.
And if they didn't agree, I mean, Bella was very gentle in her disagreements, but they portrayed Gloria terribly also. I mean, she always kept her private life very far away from her politics.
Yeah.
Oh, always. I worked at Ms. and I saw it firsthand. I mean, it didn't work. Anyway.
Jerry Skurnick. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leandra.
Oh, I was just going to say I agreed that the show really caricatured Bella Abzug, and it's why I decided to write a op-ed in the Washington Post to try to
read that. Yes.
I did too.
But nonetheless, I do think that the show is important to have out there because it is introducing younger women to Bella. And there's so many high school students and adults my generation that have reached out and they've started to do exploration. And so there's been a line that goes from Mrs. America to my book and other historians' work to try to figure out specifically who Bella really was. And I think that the ultimate impression is going to be our conversation we're having tonight, and then some of the historical work that sets the record straight. The other element with the show is that it didn't really do justice to the incredibly savvy grassroots organizing that feminists did, and that we got a sense of all of the letter writing and envelope envelope sealing that
From Schlafly, yeah.
Schlafly folks did, but we didn't get anything on the other side. And
Exactly. Let's if Danny is still with us, the one thing that I objected just personally, because I was at Houston for the National Women's Conference.
So was I.
Throw up that photograph if Danny is with us of the first ladies of the United States with Bella.
Right.
One of the scenes showed Bella sitting in the front row, actually the second row of the audience in a climactic vote on gay rights. Bella was not in the audience. She was in the chair. She never left the stage.
Exactly.
There she is. There she is with Lady Bird Johnson, Rosalind Carter, and Betty Ford. And on Bella's left is Coretta Scott King. That was where she was. And they're carrying the torch there that these women athletes had carried to Houston. Just wanted you all to see that.
We have a question from Jewel Navia asking if Harold or you, Ronnie, were there for the 1977 National Women's Conference.
I actually was there as a reporter for Channel 13.
So I was there as a press secretary, but you were a friend, so I didn't have to do anything to nudge you or push you. Or,
yeah, just for everyone who doesn't know about the National Women's Conference, this is an extremely important political event that occurred. Over 150,000, people at 56 state and territorial meetings, deliberated over and debated on a national plan of action before it got to Houston, where 2,000 elected delegates ultimately put on the finishing touches over 4 days. And then that was ultimately given to President Jimmy Carter as the Spirit of Houston report. And this was the US response to International Women's Year, United Nations initiative. And actually at University of Houston this summer on Women's Equality Day, we're launching the Sharing Stories from 77 project. And ambitiously, we want to collect everyone's stories. So Ronnie and Harold, we're going to come calling soon. We're collecting the stories.
Press secretaries don't tell all the stories. They just can't. I don't think press secretaries should write books about their clients.
I just remember all the activity in the corridors.
Yeah, exactly.
And in Bella's
rooms.
And I'll tell you one story. Bella got a great suite. That was one of the perks in the best hotel. She walked into the room, said, "This is great." She said, "Where's the bedroom?" And I said, "This must be this way." She opened the door and there was a couple in the bed having sex. She slammed the door and she said, "They did this on purpose. They did this on purpose to upset me. And the next suite she got was like a triplex because she went down like anybody else would do and say, there's a man and a woman in my bed. And the upgrade was fantastic. So she used this, I think it was actually a duplex. There were incredible meetings in that. Do you remember the suite, Ronnie?
Oh, yeah,
Meetings Until
right.
3 in the morning, strategy meetings with,
Yeah.
that was
It never stopped.
never stopped.
I just want to say one thing because it's not fair. I thought the film, I'm back to Mrs. America, Betty Friedan also was insulted in that film. I mean, Betty was difficult and she had her ways,
Mhm.
but anyway, that's all.
We have June Zeitlin writing in.
Another Bella
gee.
veteran, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
She thanks you, Leandra, for the book, and she has some comments that lead up to a question. She says that she worked for Bella on women's rights and civil rights when she was in Congress, watching and working with her up close on legislation and policy and doing work subsequently with the Congress. The fact that she did her homework on the rules and understanding of the legislative process paved the way for her ability to build alliances and achieve successes both large and small. And she doesn't think that Bella would have been as successful without the hard work she did on public policy and her unique ability to connect with both grassroots and other members of Congress and other leaders. And she says she hopes, Leandra, that you will consider doing a book on Bella's global leadership from her experience in Houston's Women's Conference to the Beijing Women's World Conference. She made an extraordinary number of contributions. Is that something you would consider?
By the way, while Leandra considers that assignment, put up the picture of Bella and Hillary Clinton in Beijing. That's a nice late shot of Bella. Go ahead, Leandra.
That's an incredible picture. And thank you, June. And I do believe that Bella Abzug's work on a global scale is extremely important and definitely deserves a volume. And perhaps I'll join Harold as the quintessential many books. How many have you done on Lincoln?
50 something.
That's right. But I guess first I am interested in her early years, which, really only got 30 pages in my book. And, I've written a lot of chapters beyond 30 pages. I think that the making of Bella Abzug is an important story to understand how women navigated institutions that were not built for them, before this moment of, feminist groundswell that we saw in the 1970s. So I'm really interested in exploring that period. But I think also if I did write a third volume on the international years, I would probably place Mim Kelber equally so in the narrative, because I think that really they had a strong partnership, and I think it was Mim most that drew Bella into the international realm and helped her think about what her third act could be, after Congress. So she's got this 25-year, career as a lawyer prior to Congress. Then she has her time in Congress, and then there's that global stage. And so she really helped her, I think, their friendship, their conversations helped her move into that space. And they, they ran We Do together, which was a really important and still is a very important NGO. And then Mim was at the, covered actually for Federated Press, the United Nations conference in San Francisco in the 40s. And I think that's really, really important too. So sometimes these stories really should be.
There was a memorial service for Bella among many memorial services. Hillary led one in Washington, but there was one in the United Nations
That's right.
General Assembly that I spoke at that was pretty astonishing because it was all international figures, and it reminded us. And women would come up and say, I'm the Bella Abzug of Kenya. I'm the Bella Abzug of Denmark. I'm the Bella Abzug of Iraq. And they all had stories that arose from their being inspired by Bella.
Yeah, and I love that on the global stage that Bella ran if women could work, rule the world sessions where she taught, kind of all of her tricks of the trade of how to be an effective negotiator in global arenas.
Did June Zeitlin work for We Do? Harold?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
Anyway, to just tell everybody what We Do is, it's the Women's Environmental Development Organization.
That's right.
Right.
a good acronym. Mac, what happened to the Skurnik question? Did you throw it out?
Oh, yes, Jerry
That's
Skurnik.
Jerry's fate. It's terrible.
Jerry Skurnik says, there's been no discussion of Bella's campaign for mayor. What do you think about her campaign for mayor? Was it a mistake?
You know, it was an open race. Abe Beam had not done well. He was going to run. Governor Carey had Mario Cuomo as his candidate. There were
Ed Koch, who she
Ed
didn't love.
Koch was coming out of nowhere to become, you know, the darling of the New York Post. It was a very good field. Percy Sutton, Herman Badillo. Think of the level of people who were running in that race. I think Dick Ravitch was in the race as well. It was very impressive. And it was very close. Again, very close. Three
Yeah,
or four
but-
points separated the top 4 or 5 people. Did
But-
she make a mistake? You know, as Bella would say, what else did I have to do? It was it's their chance to have a woman mayor, to have me, to fight.
It's politically, it was beneath her. I mean, it was in that age when she was running for everything, you know,
She liked running and she liked being in elective office.
right? But I don't know, when people
But I also
run,
think that, you know, she really had this commitment to New York and, you know, thought that she could provide her sense of leadership, that she'd done a lot of work in Congress for New York and that it was an easy way to move into that space. And I think that what really hurt her was the, you know, blackout and
The blackout and the yeah. And the
Koch was-
right to strike, whatever that was.
right,
Bella had to go on record saying you can't compel people to work.
right.
It's the Emancipation Proclamation, which I thought was sort of nice. And, you know, that became a big issue for some there's always one issue that arises in a campaign that is unexpected and also irrelevant, but gets traction because of the press.
And Ed Koch, you know, Ed Koch was, I remember he used to say, and Bella always used to talk about it because it offended her so much. During the Second World War, he said, Bella was knitting and crocheting for the Soviet.
No, wait, you're leaving out the big alliance. She was knitting for Britain and
Oh.
crocheting for the Soviets.
Soviet.
I know. I mean, they were our allies, just saying, in World War II. Go
Well,
ahead.
this
Matt.
was also law and order moment, right? And she's advocating to overhaul the criminal justice and policing system to focus on rehabilitation. Like these are some of the conversations we're having now. And she was, you know, presenting that then.
Good point.
She was going up to Bronx and it's, you know, burned out districts. And she's talking about retooling for solar power and the environment and, you know, trying to change the city that way. We just weren't quite ready for some of those issues, I think, in that moment.
But Ronnie's right. The blackout, by the way, the blackout was preceded by 3 days of 100-degree temperature.
Oh, I remember that. So hot.
At headquarters was brutal, brutal. We were in an automobile showroom on 55th Street with big orange letters on the windows that said Bella, because the landlord wouldn't let us put a sign up. So it was on the window. And the sun on the orange letters
Mm.
just baked people inside.
Mm.
It was a rough campaign, as were they all. It was never easy, right? Bella said, I never had an easy race, except maybe 1974 for Congress. But other than that, it was never easy for her. It wasn't meant to be, maybe. Mac, do we have time for a
Yeah.
couple more? By the way,
Yeah.
Mac, could you tell people how our viewers can get Leandra's book? Because I didn't do that.
Sure. You'll find, viewers, you'll find a link to purchase Leandra's book in the chat. We can rechat it now to make sure you see it. And that will connect you to Shakespeare and Company. You can purchase a copy with an autographed bookplate. And you should do that. A question for Leandra from Katrina Vanden Heuvel. Do you see a new wave, a new generation working to make transformational change within institutions, as you mentioned? And do you think they have an understanding of Bella in that context?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been so many parallels between the last 4 years and you know, the resistance politics that we're seeing, the wave of women that came in to Congress and you know, reappointed basically Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who definitely follows in the footsteps of Bella Abzug. You know, I think it's important to remember Bella Abzug was the first, you know, at whip large, she was an at-large whip, I should say. And that was, the first consequential position that women had in leadership in the House, in the Democratic Party. And so in any case, I think she paved the way for a lot of women that are currently there. And, we can see the spirit of Bella Abzug, not specifically just with women. I mean, I think that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren also channel, Bella Abzug equally. And we can look to this period in the late 1960s and early 1970s as a moment that I think is parallel in terms of progressives coming into and creating a bloc within the Democratic Party that in fact required the party to shift leftward. And so, at the time they talked about new politics, and I think we're ready for some new politics again.
Just want to say one of the photographs we didn't show, not to trivialize what you just said
Mhm.
at all, but one of the photographs in my collection that I didn't submit for this evening is a photograph of Bella Abzug and Tip O'Neill holding a giant whip.
Yes.
Bella loved that picture, and I used to say, let's, it's a little too kinky for most of us. Let's just not publicize this picture. She liked it because she liked Tip O'Neill. She liked all of her. She liked her speakers. They liked her.
Yeah,
Carl.
they were very fond of each other.
We have a clarification from Eric Hirschhorn and from June Zeitlin herself that she did in fact run We Do
Oh,
after.
good.
Oh,
Thank
thank you, June.
Passed away
Sorry,
for
sorry.
But
Sorry.
she
And,
did very amazing work in Washington.
And it's good to have Eric Hirschhorn, another Bella veteran.
Oh,
Yeah.
Eric.
And Peter Rabinowitz has written in to compliment us on the program. Wonderful program in every way, not just nostalgic, but also forward-looking. Thank you all. One thing that can't be ignored, he says, about Bella's success in Congress was that at her core, she was a lawyer and brought her legal smarts, negotiating skills, and litigation savvy to the job. She did her homework and wrote good bills, held strong hearings, and got things done. In the end, Tip O'Neill appointed her deputy whip, proving that folks were wrong to have originally underestimated her.
What about what happened with Jerry Skurnick's question?
We ignored it. That's his fate in the world. What was Jerry Skurnick's question? I thought we answered it.
Oh yeah, that was the question about the mayor.
yeah.
All right. I'm sorry.
We
You know,
disagreed, but
I
we
think
answered.
that point though about how Bella really applied her legal acumen to her work in Congress is really on point. And I think that her legal career completely paved the way for what she did in Congress. But at the same time, I don't think if she wasn't frustrated with where she could in fact push the law, she probably wouldn't have a political career, quite honestly, because she got really upset with how slow legal change happened during the late 40s and into the 1950s, and also how within the bar association she was in, it was very difficult for women to move into leadership. So Women's Strike for Peace came along at the exactly perfect time where she was ready to think about what it was like again after Hunter to be in a women-led kind of environment, and also to shift from law into politics. Which was a coming home actually to her work as student government at Hunter, I think.
Leandra, this whole thing has been so interesting from the contrast between a historian looking at it
Yeah.
and a practitioner who is not a historian. I mean, the 60s and 70s were tumultuous, especially the 60s. And there were many, I just don't want to discount all the people who worked in the civil rights and the anti-war movement. It was a movement, and Bella was really part of it. And it's so interesting when you, as a historian, look at one person and everything else. So people should not feel that they're left out, is really what I wanted to say.
No, I think you're so right, Ronnie. And that's unfortunately, I think a side effect of biography is that we do look at these singular forces, but they have a lot of enablers and they have a lot of, compatriots that are helping move things along. And, one of the, I think, struggles for Bella Abzug was that she was such a, focused on collectivism as a principle. And sometimes though, in practice would be very much an individualist. You know, she
Yeah.
was very ambitious.
Yeah.
So as a historian, I have to kind of wrestle with that and figure out, you know, what are the strengths and weaknesses of, and the tensions really there for someone that was so forceful in the 60s and 70s. But she's part of a trend, you know, a turn into politics that happened that I think we sometimes forget if we're only looking at like the separatism that occurred and the fragmentation and this unraveling that I think historians have been preoccupied with and I think is overdone.
Yeah.
What about the expansiveness
Right.
of that shift from the 60s into the 70s? And what about the, you know, flourishing of all kinds of rights movements in that moment?
Yeah.
Well, I will just end because this is the longest program we've ever had, but I loved it. I will just say that never forget, I mean, I think Ronnie's right that she grew out of movements for change and stood on the shoulders of her compatriots, but she was bigger than life. She was able to bring bring her views and her passions to I think a larger group of people than would.
So theatrical.
But it was real. I mean, she was
Yeah.
a charismatic
Right.
person. And look, I marched with her in many parades. She could outmarch me, outshout me, be heard. And we're all the better for her having
You know,
lived a very difficult, it was a very difficult career in after 1970, but she paved the way for, I know Carolyn Maloney was on briefly today, and Gail Brewer, and all the women who were elected to office after were always very generous in saying that they're standing on her shoulders.
she was like a genius. I mean, you know, there are lots of good painters, but it's the painters that really continue and do it and arrive at the leadership of their things that become what makes them so famous and so accomplished. I mean, it's the drive that she had, and
Yeah.
along with the principles and everything else. that
Mhm.
Mac,
really-
I think
Yeah, she was
I love-
definitely
we've stayed longer at the fair here, but it was worth it.
I loved your book, Leandra. So
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that, you know, more of you in the audience will write in and that I may be able to speak with more. I think one of the struggles with a book is a deadline, and I didn't get to interview as many of you that I hoped to. And so let's continue this conversation.
I think we should all say goodnight and thank our audience and Mac and Magda and Danny and the whole staff and
Yeah.
President Raab for bringing us all together.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Be well.
Night.